The desert wind still howled in Corporal Joran Varek's ears, even though he stood now in the hushed opulence of the Zintra royal palace, a place where sand was swept away before it could whisper, and silence wore robes of gold. Weeks had passed since the brutal skirmish on the dunes of Zira 9, where the war between the Terran Alliance and the Zintran Dominion had reached its bloodiest peak. Outnumbered and nearly broken, Joran's squad had been cornered by a Zintran strike force, until something unexpected happened. He saw her, Queen Valis, bleeding, half buried beneath the smoldering wreckage of her command skiff, her emerald skin scorched by plasma fire, her long white hair matted with ash and blood. She was the enemy sovereign, the architect of a dozen Terran defeats, but in that moment, she was just a wounded woman, alone in the storm of war. Without hesitation, Joran dragged her to safety, shielding her body with his own as orbital shrapnel rained down. He carried her through enemy lines, whispering reassurances in broken Zinthic, phrases he'd picked up from intercepted comms and old linguistics tapes. She never spoke, only watched him with eyes like twin moons. He left her at the edge of a neutral med station and vanished before her guards could identify him. He thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. Now, standing barefoot on the palace's polished obsidian floor, his boots confiscated, his uniform patched but still smelling of gun oil and sand, Joran tried not to gawk at the towering crystalline arches that spiraled into the ceiling like frozen lightning. Bioluminescent vines pulsed softly along the walls, casting a gentle green glow that matched the queen's skin. Guards with iridescent armor and eyes like obsidian stood motionless, their silence more intimidating than any shout. He'd been invited here under diplomatic pretense, they said, but the look in the royal messenger's eyes had been less invitation and more verdict. When the massive doors at the far end of the hall slid open with a whisper, Joran's breath caught. Queen Valis entered not on a hover throne or flanked by a dozen attendants, but alone, walking with slow, deliberate grace. Her wounds were healed, her posture regal, but there was a softness in her gaze that hadn't been there on the battlefield. She wore a gown of woven starlight silk, shimmering like captured nebulae, and her white hair cascaded down her back like frozen comet trails. She stopped a few paces from him and tilted her head, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "You saved my life, Joran Varek of Terra," she said, her voice melodic but firm, the Zinthic accent curling around his name like smoke. "And for that, the law of Zintra demands a debt be repaid." Joran swallowed hard. "Your Majesty, I didn't expect anything in return. I just couldn't leave you there." She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the stone. On Zintra, to spare a royal life in war is not an act of mercy. It is a binding vow. The ancient code calls it Sylvan, the life bond. By shielding me with your body, you declared yourself my sworn protector and potential consort. Joran blinked. "Consort? You mean marry you?" A ripple of amusement crossed her face. "Unless you'd prefer the alternative, public execution for unauthorized royal contact. But I find the first option far more agreeable." He nearly choked. Wait, I'm just a corporal. I fix plasma rifles and dig foxholes. I once burned stew so badly my squad made me sleep outside the barracks for a week. I'm not exactly prince material." Queen Valis let out a soft laugh, unexpected, warm, and utterly disarming. "You carried me through fire while your own people retreated. You spoke to me in my tongue, even if you mispronounced thank you as your turnip is on fire." She mimicked his clumsy accent, and Joran flushed crimson. "You are more than your rank, Joran Varek, and I am more than my crown." Over the next few days, Joran was given quarters fit for a planetary governor, silken sheets, self-warming baths, and a balcony that overlooked the twin moons of Zintra rising over endless violet forests. He should have felt grateful. Instead, he felt like a mouse accidentally invited to a lion's banquet. The palace staff treated him with cautious reverence. Some bowed, others whispered behind their hands. He overheard one chambermaid say, "He's so pink." Another giggled, "And short." Joran, at a perfectly average 5 feet 10 inches, decided not to correct them. Yet amid the absurdity, something unexpected unfolded. Valis visited him every evening, not as a queen, but as a woman curious about Earth. She asked about oceans, dogs, jazz music, and why humans insisted on putting cheese on everything. In return, she told him about Zintran history, how her people once lived in harmony with the planet's sentient crystal trees, how war had hardened them, how she'd never known a friend outside court politics. She confessed she'd never laughed until he'd tripped over a gravity rug in the throne room and yelped like a startled pup. That night, as they sat on his balcony sharing fermented moonfruit wine, Joran realized he wasn't just charmed, he was captivated. But the universe, as always, had other plans. On the seventh evening, alarms shattered the palace's serenity. Crimson lights pulsed from the corridors, and the soft hum of the palace's energy shields rose to a shriek. "Rebels," Valus said grimly, already strapping on a plasma gauntlet, a faction of Zintran hardliners, furious that their queen would even consider mating with a human, had launched a coup. They'd infiltrated the palace through the old aqueducts and were advancing on the Heartspire, the central command nexus. Joran didn't hesitate. He grabbed the ceremonial dagger from his wall, more decorative than practical, but better than nothing, and followed Valus into the chaos. The palace, once a place of silent elegance, became a warren of flashing lasers and echoing screams. Joran found himself side by side with Valus, back to back in a narrow corridor, as rebels poured in from both ends. She moved like liquid emerald, graceful, lethal, deflecting bolts with her gauntlet, striking with precision that left no room for doubt. But even queens bleed. A lucky shot clipped her shoulder and she stumbled. Joran caught her before she fell. "Stay behind me," he growled, and for the first time she obeyed. He wasn't a hero. He was a corporal with shaky hands and a bad sense of direction. But in that moment, he remembered every drill, every ambush, every trick he'd learned in the sand. He used the palace's shifting architecture to his advantage, triggering security panels, rerouting power to overload enemy weapons, even hurling a ceremonial vase at one rebel's head hard enough to knock him out cold. Valus watched him with wide eyes, not just as her protector, but as something new, a partner. When the last rebel fell, silence returned, heavier than before. Valus leaned against a wall, panting, her green skin glowing faintly with exertion. "You fight like a man who's never lost," she said. "I lose all the time," Joran replied, checking her wound. "I just refuse to stay down." She caught his hand. "Then stay with me, not because of Sylvan, not because of duty, because I want you to." He looked into her moonpale eyes and saw not a queen, but a woman who'd spent her life building walls, and had just handed him the key. "Okay," he said, voice rough, "but only if you promise to laugh at my terrible cooking." She smiled, a real, radiant smile that lit up the corridor like dawn. "Only if you promise to keep tripping over gravity rugs." I find it endearing. The days that followed were a whirlwind of political maneuvering and whispered scandals. The High Council objected humans were primitive, unpredictable, incompatible. Some even claimed the Union would unravel Zintran genetics. Valus silenced them with a single decree: "My heart is not a matter for debate." Joran, for his part, began learning Zinthic properly, stumbled through royal etiquette, and accidentally activated the palace's emergency sprinklers during a formal dinner. The ambassador from Krylos was not amused. Valus nearly choked laughing into her soup. Yet beneath the surface, deeper currents stirred. The rebels hadn't acted alone. Intelligence revealed they'd been supplied by a rogue Terran admiral, someone who stood to gain from destabilizing the Zintran throne. War threatened to reignite, and this time it wouldn't be skirmishes on desert dunes. It would be annihilation. One quiet evening, Valus led Joran to the palace's oldest chamber, the Chamber of Echoes, where ancestral voices were said to whisper through the walls. In the center stood a crystalline pedestal holding the Heartstone of Zintra, a pulsing gem that resonated with the planet's core. "This is how we commune with our world," she explained. "But it's weakening. The wars, the mining, the fear, it's poisoning the bond." Joran placed a hand on the stone. To his surprise, it warmed under his touch, its light flickering brighter. Valus gasped. "That's never happened with an off-worlder before." "Maybe it just needed someone who doesn't see it as a weapon or a power source," Joran said softly. "Just a friend." In that moment, they both understood. Their union wasn't just about love or law, it was about healing. Two wounded worlds, two lonely souls, finding something in each other that neither knew they were missing. Valus reached for his hand, her fingers cool and steady against his calloused palm. "Whatever comes next," she said, "we face it together." And for the first time in his life, Joran Varric didn't feel like just a soldier. He felt like a beginning. The wedding preparations began in earnest. Not the cold, ceremonial affair the council wanted, but something alive, blending Terran music with Zintran light dances, Human vows with ancestral chants. Joran's squad, smuggled in under diplomatic cover, arrived in mismatched uniforms and brought a cake they'd baked themselves. Slightly lopsided, but delicious. Valus gifted him a ring forged from meteoric iron and heartstone shards. A symbol, she said, that even stars can learn to shine together. But as the twin moons aligned above the palace spires, casting silver shadows across the gardens, a new message arrived. Encrypted, urgent, marked with the Terran High Command seal. Joran opened it alone in his chamber, heart pounding. It was from his estranged younger sister, now a scientist on Mars. They're coming for you, Joran. Not just the rebels. There's a shadow fleet forming at the edge of the system. They call themselves the Purifiers. They believe cross-species unions are an abomination. They won't stop until Zintra burns, and you with it. He crumpled the message, then smoothed it out again. He thought of Valus laughing in the moonlight, of her hand in his during the battle, of the way the Heartstone had glowed for him. He wasn't just marrying a queen. He was choosing a future. One where love was stronger than fear, where difference was a bridge, not a wall. The next morning, he found Valus in the palace armory, not in a gown, but in full battle regalia. She'd already read the intel. They think we're weak because we love, she said, strapping a plasma rifle to her back. Let them learn how wrong they are. Joran grinned, picking up his own weapon. Just promise me one thing. What? If I die this time, don't let anyone say I burned the stew. She kissed him then, fierce, tender, full of stars and steel. And as the first alarms blared, signaling the arrival of the Shadow Fleet, they stepped out onto the palace ramparts, not as queen and soldier, but as equals. The sky darkened with ships. The ground trembled. But in the heart of the storm, two hands remained clasped. One pink, one green, refusing to let go, because some bonds aren't forged in ceremony, but in courage. And theirs had only just begun. The sky above Zintra tore open like a wound. From the black beyond, the Purifiers descended, not in neat formation, but in a swarm of jagged obsidian warships, their hulls etched with crimson sigils that pulsed like infected veins. They called themselves guardians of pure blood, fanatics who believed interspecies unions were cosmic blasphemy. To them, Joran and Valus weren't just a threat to tradition, they were an insult to existence itself. Yet as the first plasma barrage slammed into the palace shields, shaking the very bedrock of the Heart Spire, Joran felt not fear, but focus. He'd spent his life reacting, taking cover, following orders, surviving. But now, for the first time, he had something worth defending that wasn't measured in meters or munitions. It was measured in laughter over burnt stew, in quiet walks beneath alien constellations, in the way Valus's white hair caught the light like spun moonlight. The palace defenses held, for now. But the Purifiers weren't here for a siege. They wanted spectacle, and they had brought their weapon. A single drop pod, sleek and silent, pierced the atmosphere and embedded itself in the palace gardens. From it emerged a figure clad in black ceramite, face hidden behind a mask that mirrored nothing. No eyes, no mouth, just void. This was Kalen Vorth, former Terran biowarfare commander, now self-proclaimed High Scourge of the Purifiers. He'd once been Joran's superior during the Andromeda Uprising, before he'd cracked under the weight of loss and declared all non-humans genetic pollutants. Varek, Kalen's voice boomed across the courtyard, amplified by unseen tech. You shame your species. Surrender the Abomination Queen, and I'll grant you a clean death. Refuse, and I'll peel her alive before your eyes, cell by cell. Valus stepped forward, but Joran gently pulled her back. This one's mine, he said quietly. He walked alone into the garden, unarmed, hands open at his sides. The court gasped. Even the palace guards shifted uneasily. But Joran knew Kalen, knew his pride, his need to dominate, his obsession with control. You always were sentimental, Kalen sneered as Joran stopped 10 paces away. Fighting for love? How human. And you always talk too much, Joran replied. While you're monologuing. My sister's virus is already in your ship's core. Kalen froze. What? Joran nodded toward the sky. A moment later, one of the Purifier dreadnoughts flickered. Lights dying, engines sputtering. Then another. The fleet wavered like a swarm losing its queen. You think I came here alone? Joran said, a slow grin spreading. My sister didn't just send a warning. She sent a gift. A neural worm, keyed to Purifier biosignatures. It's rewriting your navigation, disabling life support, locking your weapons. In 6 minutes, your entire fleet will be floating coffins. Kalen snarled and drew a vibroblade. Then I'll kill you both before it finishes. He lunged fast, brutal, lethal. But Joran had spent weeks training with Zintran duelists, learning to read microtremors in an opponent's stance. He sidestepped, not with grace, but with the awkward pragmatism of a soldier who'd survived by cheating death. As Kalen overextended, Joran grabbed a fallen ornamental branch, twisted crystal wood, and jammed it into the joint of the commander's armor. Kalen howled as hydraulics hissed and failed. His left arm locked. Joran didn't wait. He drove a knee into the weak point beneath the ribcage, a spot Kalen had once taught him during combat drills. Lesson 3, Joran panted. Never assume your enemy forgot what you taught them. Valus was at his side in an instant, plasma gauntlet humming. But before she could strike, Joran raised a hand. Wait! He pulled off Kalen's mask. The man beneath was gaunt, eyes hollow, cheeks scarred from old burns. He looked less like a zealot and more like a ghost haunting his own body. You don't have to do this, Joran said softly. We lost people too, my whole platoon on Cygnus. But we didn't let it hollow us out. Kalen laughed. A broken, wet sound. You think kindness fixes what's broken? You're naive, Varric. The universe doesn't care about love. It only respects strength. And yet, Valus said, stepping forward. Here you are, defeated by a burnt stew cook and a queen who laughs at tripping men. Kalen spat blood. Kill me, or I'll rise again. Joran looked at Valus. She gave a small nod. Then, to everyone's shock, Joran holstered his weapon and offered Kalen a canteen of Zintran healing nectar. Drink, then you'll face trial, not execution. If Zintra can heal, so can you. Kalen stared at the canteen like it was venom. But after a long silence, trembling, he took it. Above, the Purifier fleet surrendered one by one, life signs flickering back online as the virus shifted from sabotage to pacification. Joran's sister's final twist. Mercy coded as code. In the days that followed, the palace became a crucible of uneasy peace. Kalen was imprisoned, not in a dungeon, but in a meditation chamber, tended by Zintran healers who believed even poisoned roots could sprout new leaves. The High Council, once hostile, now watched Joran with grudging respect. One elder even asked him how to make the cheesy bread. Joran taught him grilled cheese. The elder cried. It reminded him of his childhood. But the true test came not from war, but from within. One night, deep in the Heartspire archives, Valus led Joran to a sealed chamber older than the palace itself. Inside lay a cradle of living crystal, pulsing faintly. This is the Genesis vessel, she explained, voice low. It can carry Zintran life, embryos, genetic echoes, the soul seed of our people. Traditionally, only royal consorts activate it, to ensure the bloodline continues. Joran understood. You're asking if I'm ready to be more than a husband, a father. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she placed his hand on the cradle. Warmth spread through his palm, and images bloomed in his mind. Not memories, but possibilities. A child with green-tinged skin and his crooked smile, laughing as they chased bioluminescent butterflies through the palace gardens. A daughter with white hair like starlight, learning Terran lullabies from him and Zintran star chants from her mother. A family built not on purity, but on fusion. I don't know if I'm ready, Joran admitted. I've never even changed a diaper. Valus smiled, eyes shimmering. Neither have I, but we'll learn. Together. And in that quiet chamber, beneath the planet's ancient heart, they made a vow not written in law, but in hope. Weeks later, as the twin moons reached their zenith, the wedding finally took place. Not in the grand throne room, but in the palace gardens, beneath the very tree where Joran had faced Kalen. Terran and Zintran guests sat side by side. His squad wore formal dress uniforms, still slightly wrinkled. Her counselors wore ceremonial masks woven with earth flowers. A Zintran choir sang "Here Comes the Sun," badly but enthusiastically. When the high speaker asked if anyone objected, a single voice called out, "I do!" All heads turned. It was Kalen, standing at the edge of the crowd, thinner but clearer-eyed. Joran tensed, but Kalen didn't draw a weapon. He stepped forward, bowed deeply, and placed a small data chip at their feet. I reprogrammed the Purifier archives, he said. All their blacklists, their hate algorithms, erased, replaced with this. He looked at Joran. A poem your sister wrote. about two stars colliding and making something new. Then he turned and walked away, not as a prisoner, but as a man seeking penance. The ceremony continued. Valus wore a gown of woven earth cotton and Zintran silk. Joran wore his corporal's uniform, now adorned with green sashes and white blossom pins. When they exchanged vows, Joran didn't quote scripture or law. He said, "I promise to carry you through fire, laugh at your terrible jokes, and never let you eat my last ration bar, unless you're really hungry." Valus laughed, real, bright, unguarded, and kissed him before the officiant could finish. The feast lasted all night. There was dancing. Joran stepped on Valus's toes 3 times. Storytelling, his squad exaggerated the stew incident to mythic proportions. And a surprise performance by a Zintran jazz band that somehow merged saxophones with harmonic crystal flutes. But as dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and emerald, Joran and Valus slipped away, hand in hand, to the balcony overlooking the violet forests. Below, the Genesis vessel glowed softly in the royal nursery, its pulse steady, its future unwritten. "They'll call us fools," Valus said, leaning into him. "Dreamers, traitors to our kinds." "Let them," Joran replied, kissing her temple. "We'll be too busy building a world where kinds don't matter, only kindness does." Far above, Earth and Zintra satellites blinked in silent harmony. The war wasn't over, not really. Fanatics still lurked in the dark. Old hatreds took generations to die. But here, in this moment, under alien stars and familiar hearts, something new had taken root. Not an empire, not a treaty, a home. And as the first rays of sun touched the palace spires, Joran Varec, the corporal who burned stew, who tripped over rugs, who once thought his life would end in sand, knew with absolute certainty that his story wasn't ending. It was just learning how to fly. Peace, it turned out, was far more dangerous than war. 3 months after the wedding, the Genesis vessel began to pulse with an irregular rhythm, too fast, too erratic. The palace healers whispered in hushed, worried tones. The embryo within was viable, yes, but its genetic matrix was unstable, torn between 2 worlds that had never been meant to merge. Valus grew pale, her green skin dulling like tarnished jade. She stopped eating. She spent nights kneeling before the vessel, humming ancient Zintran lullabies, her tears pooling like liquid silver on the crystal floor. Joran tried everything. He sent encrypted pleas to human geneticists, smuggled in experimental terracell stabilizers, hidden in care packages from his sister, even bargained with black market biosmugglers on the fringe colonies. One night, desperate, he broke into the royal archive and uncovered something the healers hadn't told him. The Genesis vessel required a harmony bond, a neural synchronization between both parents, conducted beneath the heartstone during a planetary alignment. If performed correctly, it would stabilize the embryo. If failed, the child would dissolve into raw genetic static and both parents could suffer neural collapse. The next alignment was in 7 days. But before Joran could tell Valus, a coded message arrived not from Earth, but from deep within Zintran territory. It was from her estranged younger sister, Princess Lyra, thought dead during the civil wars a decade earlier. The message contained coordinates, a single phrase, "The blood remembers what the crown forgets," and a biometric key that only a royal sibling could possess. Against the council's protests, Valus insisted they go. "Lyra knew things," she said, her voice strained but resolute. "Secrets about our bloodline, about why the Heartstone reacts to you." They traveled in secret aboard a cloaked skiff, slipping past orbital sentinels and landing in the ash wastes, a desolate region where the planet's crust had cracked open during the First Great War, revealing veins of raw Heartstone buried deep below. There, in a crumbling sanctuary carved into a dead crystal tree, they found Lyra. She was nothing like Valus. Where the queen was regal and composed, Lyra was feral, her green skin scarred, her white hair cropped short, her eyes sharp with decades of survival. She wore scavenged armor and carried a rifle older than the Dominion itself. "You brought the human," she said, not as an accusation but as a test. "He's my husband," Valus replied, stepping in front of Joran instinctively. Lyra laughed bitterly. "Husband, you really did it. You tied your fate to a species that still burns its dead instead of returning them to the planet." She turned to Joran. "Do you even know what your blood has done?" Before he could answer, she activated a hidden panel in the wall. The ground trembled, and from the shadows emerged children. Dozens of them. Human, Zintran, and hybrids. Some with faint green undertones in their skin, others with silver-tinged eyes or white hair streaked with brown. They ranged from toddlers to teens, all watching Joran with a mixture of hope and fear. "These are the forgotten," Lyra said softly. "Children of forbidden unions, left to die in the wastes when their parents were executed or exiled. I've been hiding them for years, protecting them, and for the first time, some of them are thriving." She led them to a cavern lit by soft heartstone shards embedded in the walls. In the center stood a crude but functional biolab, salvaged Terran tech fused with Zintran biocircuitry. On a screen flickered genetic readouts. Joran's breath caught. "My blood," he whispered. "Yes," Lyra said. "Yours. Your genome carries a latent retrovirus, harmless in humans, but in hybrids it acts as a stabilizer. It's why the Genesis vessel responded to you. Why my children are surviving." Valis stared at her sister, stunned. "You knew? All this time?" "I suspected," Lyra admitted. "But I couldn't risk reaching out. The council would have purged us all. But when I heard you married a human, this human, I knew the stars had finally aligned." Suddenly, alarms blared. Not from their skiff, but from deep within the wastes. Lyra's face hardened. "They found us." Seconds later, the sanctuary shook as plasma fire rained down from above. Not purifiers, not rebels, but the Zintran Royal Guard loyalists sent by the High Council, who had deemed the existence of hybrids an existential contamination. "They'll kill them all," Lyra said, already herding the children toward hidden tunnels. "Take the skiff. Go. I'll hold them off." "No," Valis said firmly. "We stand together." Joran looked at the children. Scared, fragile, yet alive because someone dared to care. He thought of the child growing inside the vessel back at the palace. Thought of his sister's words. "Love isn't blood, it's choice." He grabbed a rifle from the wall. "Then let's give them a fight they'll never forget." What followed was not a battle of armies, but of desperation and ingenuity. Joran used his knowledge of Terran tactics to rig sonic mines from broken communicators. Lyra and her oldest hybrid teens, trained in guerrilla warfare, ambushed the guards from the ash dunes using the terrain like ghosts. Valis, drawing on her royal authority, broadcast a direct override command through the guards' neural implants, causing momentary confusion. But their real weapon was the Heartstone itself. Deep beneath the sanctuary, they uncovered a raw vein of the planet's core crystal, unrefined, volatile. Lyra had been using tiny shards to stabilize the children's biology. Now, Joran proposed something reckless. Overload the vein with a concentrated pulse from the skiff's power core, creating a resonant shockwave that would disrupt all nearby tech, including the guards' weapons and comms. It could destabilize the entire region, Valis warned. Trigger a seismic rupture. It could also save them, Joran countered, nodding toward a little girl clutching a stuffed Terran dog. With no time to debate, they did it. The explosion wasn't fire, but light. A blinding emerald wave that surged through the wastes, silencing weapons, knocking out drones, and sending the royal guard fleeing in disarray. The ground cracked, but the sanctuary held. And as the dust settled, the Heartstone vein pulsed once. Then began to grow, tendrils of living crystal weaving through the ruins, forming new shelters, new roots. The planet itself was healing. In the aftermath, Valis made a decision that would shatter centuries of tradition. Broadcast live from the wastes, her face streaked with ash, her gown torn, her hand clasped with Joran's and Lyra's, she declared the forgotten children under royal protection. "Blood is not purity," she proclaimed. "It is possibility, and Zintra will no longer fear its own future." The council erupted. Some called for her abdication. Others threatened secession. But the people, ordinary Zintrans who had lost children to war, who had hidden their own forbidden loves, rose in silent support. Flowers appeared at palace gates. Songs were sung in the streets. A new word entered the language, Pharekian, meaning one who bridges. Back at the palace, with the Genesis vessel now glowing steadily, Joran and Valis prepared for the Harmony Bond. But Lyra brought one final twist. "The alignment isn't just for the child," she revealed, handing them an ancient scroll. "It's a gateway. The Heartstone doesn't just stabilize genetics. It awakens ancestral memory. You'll see everything. Every life your bloodline has touched. Every choice that led you here." That night, beneath the twin moons, they stood before the Heartstone, hands joined, foreheads touching. As the planetary energies aligned, light enveloped them, not blinding, but embracing. Joran saw his great-grandfather, a refugee who'd shielded a wounded alien during the First Contact riots. He saw Velus's ancestor, a Zintran mystic who'd secretly studied Terran poetry. He saw countless others, human medics healing Zintran orphans, Zintran engineers saving human colonies from solar flares. All threads in a tapestry neither species knew they were weaving. And in the center of it all, a vision of their child. Not as a hybrid, but as a harmonian, a being who could speak to both worlds, who would one day stand where they stood and say, "We were never enemies. We were just waiting to remember." When the vision faded, Velus was crying. Joran held her close. The Genesis vessel pulsed in perfect rhythm. But their respite was brief. A week later, a Terran diplomatic envoy arrived, ostensibly to congratulate the royal couple. But during the private audience, the ambassador slid a data chip across the table. "High Command's final offer," she said coldly. "Annul the marriage. Hand over the hybrid embryo for study. Or Earth withdraws all support. You'll be alone against the next wave." Velus stood, eyes blazing. "Tell your masters we don't negotiate with bullies." The ambassador smiled thinly. "Then enjoy your isolation." As she left, Joran noticed something. Her wristcom bore the same crimson sigil as the purifiers. The Terran government wasn't just complicit, they were funding the fanatics. That night, Joran sent a single message to his sister. "It's not over. They're coming from both sides." Her reply came instantly. "Then we build something they can't destroy. Meet me at the edge of the system. I've got a ship. And a plan." Now, standing on the palace balcony once more, Joran watched stars wink into view. Some familiar, some alien, all watching. Velus leaned against him, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Lyra stood nearby, sharpening a blade, her eyes scanning the horizon. "They think they can divide us," Velus murmured. Joran kissed her hair. "Let them try." Because love, they were learning, wasn't just a feeling. It was a rebellion, and theirs had only just begun to burn. Years later, the storms of war faded into memory, replaced by the quiet rhythm of home. Joran and Velus built not just a family, but a sanctuary, where hybrid children played under twin suns, where Terran jazz drifted through palace gardens, and where the Heartstone pulsed in time with laughter. Their daughter, Sarah, born with green-tinged skin and her father's crooked grin, could calm storms with a song and fix plasma rifles by age 6. She called Joran Papa and Velus Mama Star, and every night, they read her stories from both Earth and Zintra until she fell asleep wrapped in starlight quilts. The palace no longer felt like a throne room, but a living house, walls lined with mismatched art, corridors echoing with playful chases, kitchens filled with the smell of slightly burnt stew. Joran never quite mastered it. Lyra became the children's fierce guardian and beloved aunt, training them in survival and compassion alike. His old squad visited every cycle, now uncles to dozens of hybrid kids, their uniforms replaced by gardening aprons and teaching robes. Peace didn't come from treaties alone, but from shared meals, mended toys, and the way strangers' eyes widened in wonder at a human man braiding his alien wife's white hair beneath alien constellations. The purifiers dwindled, outgrown by a new generation who saw no contradiction in loving two worlds. Even the Terran High Command eventually relented, not out of kindness, but because the Zintran-Terran alliance had become too strong, too beloved, too human to break. Joran never became a general or a legend. He remained a corporal at heart, fixing things, holding hands, telling terrible jokes. And Velus, though still queen, ruled more often from the nursery than the throne, her crown often worn by Sarah during tea parties with crystal butterflies.